I find it interesting. We don't have to seek medical guidance if I'm telling you to eat Cheerios every morning and have canola oil, right? Those say heart healthy all over them, right? So you don't need to ask your doctor if you can do that, but we need to ask our doctors if we can eat in the way that our bodies are originally designed. It's a funny concept.
I'm Ann Marie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hotflash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Ann Marie.
So I am so happy to welcome Teryn Clarke to the podcast, speaking about our brain health. You have a new book out, Brain Health Action Plan, Simple Science-Backed Lifestyle Changes that Optimize Cognitive Fitness and Reduce Alzheimer's Risk.
Exactly. Thank you for having me.
That's the book we need. Okay. Did your mom have Alzheimer's? Is that in...
She did. And so it's really personal for me. I've been taking care of dementia in my clinic because I'm a neurologist for the last decade. But I found that there wasn't help for people like me, kids whose parents or grandparents, in my case, both my mom and her mom had dementia. And actually, because my grandmother lived so long, my mom and my grandma were alive at the same time, both with Alzheimer's, which was a unique challenge. But I just found there wasn't much advice in terms of preventative brain health for people like me, where we have a lot of advice for cardiovascular health and managing cholesterol and all of those kinds of things. And so I wanted to step into that gap and try to educate people because they should know there is so much more control over whether we are going to develop Alzheimer's disease or not than we think. So I just wanted to help people understand that and then learn how to take action without being intimidated by kind of the uber wellness model that's emerging. It can be such a big jump from where people are to all of that biohacking stuff. This is the first step in trying to get our brains healthier.
I do notice that people jump to that biohacking stuff, but they don't have the foundational blocks in place.
And that can lead to rebound, just like dieting. When you go from 0 to 60 super fast, it's really hard to maintain those changes. And I am probably like so many of your listeners, I have a bunch of 300 to 400 page books on all kinds of different things, women's athletic performance, all kinds of elite health types of things. And a lot of those I can't even get through. I need just more of a step-by-step guide. I need to be a little more gentle with myself. And so my approach is, I think of it like saving for your retirement account. If you start early, the little changes you make, the little contributions you make a huge difference when you're older, as opposed to if you wait till you're 60 to start saving for your retirement, you're going to have to make like massive changes in your spending to save that money. And it's the same for health. If you're going to try to make up for all the misdeeds of, or just the mindlessness of lifestyle earlier in life, it's going to be harder. But if we're incorporate a little more mindfulness and make a little hacks and look at processed foods and just pay a little more attention, the earlier we do that, the bigger impact it has later in life.
Okay, so you talk about people who beat their genetics. They had multiple times more risk of getting dementia. And when you see them, they don't have it. They had the genetic markers, they had it in their family like you. What do you see in those people?
Those people usually have a similar pattern, and they always have had a habit of exercise, which in the generation where I've seen a couple of women who've done it, it's a little unusual because women in the 50s, most women weren't really into exercising for exercise's sake. So those women have been unique in terms of having that exercise habit. Most of them have not had much of a sweet tooth. They like more savory or kind of fatty treats are their thing, not so much sugary sweets. And so those have been two of the big foundational aspects that I've seen. And then when they do come to my office, starting to have memory problems way later than I would have expected them, according to their genetics, we can make a couple tweaks and really hold off that progression of their Alzheimer's disease and their memory loss, trying to prevent it from really interfering with day-to-day activities as opposed to just a mild memory problem. So I know it can be done. I've seen these people, they're super impressive. So it's all of those factors together, knowing the book learning from being a doctor, then seeing these people in person who have done it, not knowing that they were trying to live a brain healthy lifestyle. It just happened to be the lifestyle they chose and beating their genetics. And I think one way to put it is genetics load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So there's a lot you can do to not pull the trigger on your genetics. So whether or not you have an accelerator gene for Alzheimer's, if your listeners have done something like a 23andMe or any program where they can look at their genetics, or if they just have somebody in their family who's had Alzheimer's disease or another dementia, that puts us at increased risk. And the hard thing about making choices in midlife is we don't have a measurement. If you take a blood pressure medicine, you can go get your blood pressure measured and it's making a change and reducing your risk. Some of these lifestyle changes, we don't necessarily know. Now we got to wait 40 years to see if we're preventing dementia. The way you can tell if it's working now is that most of these brain healthy changes will improve focus and attention now. So that's a great way to know that, yes, your brain health is improving, because that focus is something that is really notable for people, focus and attention. So that's a great benefit.
Yeah, everyone talks about brain fog. There's even a brain fog emoji. So that's interesting. So people don't want to have brain fog now. Okay, so you can't do it for later. Well, get sharper now. Okay, can you just lead us? Obviously, your book lays it all out, but you did mention sugar as a top. And we do hear people call this type 3 diabetes. I don't know how you feel about that term, but
yes, I agree with that term in terms of using type 3 diabetes as a way to describe Alzheimer's disease. Sugar is a huge player in most of the chronic diseases that we're seeing around the world, including Alzheimer's disease. And the reason we call it Alzheimer's or type 3 diabetes is that when our bodies get insulin resistant and our sugar's high and our body just can't even respond to it anymore because it's so overloaded with sugar, the same thing happens in our brain. And our brain primarily uses glucose or sugar as a fuel. So when it can't pull it in anymore because it's just overwhelmed and insulin resistant, then we get brain fog. So it is really important. A lot of the interventions I talk about in the book, intermittent fasting or time restricted eating is one of those, which can be intimidating just starting out. But in my book, I lay out a very gentle way to start to incorporate it. And for people who don't have medical clearance to incorporate it at all, we can talk about what we have for breakfast instead of introducing carbs to try to keep our brains working on ketone bodies or fats, which is an alternative fuel and gives our body and our brain a little break from the sugar onslaught. But I think one of the challenges is when we think about sugar, we immediately go to where am I adding sugar to look for sources to cut down. But most of the sugar is coming in processed foods, in sneaky sources that we don't even see as sweet, crackers, wheat bread, some really surprising sources of added sugar. And so those are some easy targets to cut down without feeling like we're missing the sugar so that we can still have a treat here and there, something we really enjoy, but not having just all the garbage sweets coming in that we're not even aware of. So tweaking our mindfulness a little bit can help us be healthier in ways that aren't so painful. And that's what I tried to do in the book. I don't want people that feel like they're turning up their lives upside down. It's just about progress, not perfection, and just slow progress moving towards the goals. And pretty soon you look back and it's a couple months down the line and you realize, oh, I'm not eating those sugars anymore and I'm not craving sugar like I was. So breaking that addiction can be difficult, but I think there's a gentle approach that we can take with ourselves to get that done.
You're the first person I've seen who's a medical doctor who's talking and working on the brain, who's talking about seed oils.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a controversial area, right? Because I see people saying seed oils are fine. And anyone who tells you they're not, there's no studies that say that.
There are studies that say that. So if somebody's telling you there are no studies that show that seed oils are harmful, then that's not accurate.
There literally are. I saw a dietitian the other day and I was like, how can you be saying there's no studies? It's insane.
Right.
But you know what it's like on social media.
Yeah. So it's accurate to say there are studies on both sides of the argument. There are studies that would suggest that seed oils are healthy, and are studies that suggest they aren't healthy. There are some controversial points on both sides of those studies when you really dig into them, but clearly there are some trends that are perfectly correlated with our chronic disease state. And that is when we look at high fructose corn syrup, that perfectly correlates to our chronic disease state. And when we look at the rise in seed oil consumption, that also perfectly correlates. And correlation is not causation. But when we look at a molecular level about what those seed oils contain compared to something like olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, we understand at a molecular level what they do. And it's largely because they're high in omega-6 fatty acids as opposed to omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-6 fatty acids are very pro-inflammatory. As we look at the Alzheimer's picture, and your listeners may be familiar, there's been quite a controversy over a compound called amyloid that we find in the brains of people who died of Alzheimer's. The controversy is the amyloid causing the disease, or is the amyloid being brought into and built by the brain to try to wall off other processes that are damaging the brain, and it's just a bystander? No matter which it is, it's a marker for the inflammation and the disease state of Alzheimer's disease. And inflammation and oxidation are the two biggest players that we understand now in Alzheimer's disease. Also in vascular disease, which is the same thing that goes on the heart, goes on in the brain. And those seed oils are very pro-inflammatory. They're driving that inflammatory process. And inflammation is causing disease in all of our organs, and the brain is not unique or protected from that effect. Yes, I am a strong advocate of avoiding seed oils where we can, but it also dovetails with most of our seed oils are coming in processed food. And that's also where most of our sugar is coming in, and excess salt, which salt is not bad for the brain. That salt has been really unfairly vilified. It's a very healthy compound. We need it. We have a ton of salt in our body. But just the plain NaCl salt without all the other minerals that are usually part of salt, when we get like a Maldon salt what we really want is a deep salt that's from deep in the earth, so it doesn't have as many pollutants in it. But all of those have a lot of other minerals in them, magnesium, a lot of other beneficial compounds that we don't get when we are getting our salt through a processed food. Processed foods almost always have a source of sugar, a source of added sugar, seed oils, and then NaCl, just plain salt, just sodium chloride with no other beneficial compounds. So if your listeners are going to do one thing, if you cut down the amount of processed foods, anything that's grab and go, you'll be cutting down all three of those compounds really quite dramatically. So that's a great first step.
Okay. And intermittent fasting is another very controversial topic.
Yes.
I can't get a straight answer or figure it out other than I know when I do it, I feel good. I know that my body responds, and I don't think it's promoting an eating disorder in me, but in some people it is problematic. So I wonder how you navigate that.
So I think if people have any predisposition to eating disorder, I mean, restriction can be, they'd have to work closely with the nutritionist and be sure they're doing it in a safe way. For people who don't have a predisposition to eating disorder, it's really the natural way that our genetics are built for us to eat. So I find it interesting. We don't have to seek medical guidance if I'm telling you to eat Cheerios every morning and have canola oil, right? Those say heart healthy all over them, right? So you don't need to ask your doctor if you can do that, but we need to ask our doctors if we can eat in the way that our bodies are originally designed. Is a funny concept. So the reason that intermittent fasting is thought to, it goes back to our genetics and to ancient man when we were hunter-gatherers. We did not have access to food 24 hours a day. We generally ate for 4 to 6 hours when we encountered food, either berries that we found or slaughtered a beast. And so most of our day was spent in a fasting state, like when you're sleeping. And so what happens during that time is you burn through all the sugar that you ingested in your last meal. Then for a while, you run on sugar that was stored in your liver. And then after that, your body switches to burning fat for fuel, and you get a complete break from sugar and insulin. And so that's why people who talk about intermittent fasting are promoting it, because so many of the world's population are developing insulin resistance because their body never gets a break from seeing sugar and insulin. And so if we can stretch that period out where our body isn't getting exposed to insulin, then we can restore that sensitivity, and we won't have excess sugar in our bloodstream, which is harmful to all of our organs. So that's why we're trying to harness it. For the brain can run on sugar or ketone bodies. And so when we get through all our meal sugar, liver sugar, and we start burning fat to run, that can be very positive for the brain. And people do note improved focus when they run on ketones, because it is a fuel that the brain likes to run on. But if there's sugar present, the brain can't choose to run on any fats present. So if we're eating sugar and then we're adding coconut oil, because those are the medium chain triglycerides that our brain can run on, it can't run on those triglycerides. It has to still run on sugar. So it's only in the absence of any available sugar that our brain can switch over. And just like you reported, most people report they feel amazing focus when they're running on ketones. For me, although I knew all of these interventions, I wasn't really practicing all of them until I was working on the book. And so I got much more serious about intermittent fasting. And I too feel the focus. It's really amazing. But that probably changed my body composition the most. I noticed the most like leaning out with that intervention, more than even just cutting down sugar, which was surprising. So I have incorporated that, and I really like that intervention. I like that lifestyle because I feel so great with intermittent fasting that I want everybody to do it because I want them to feel as good as I feel. But of course, there are some limitations, and there's some reasons that some people wouldn't be able to participate in that intervention. And that's fine. There's lots of other things in the book that they can do. It's not an all or nothing. It's what fits for you, what you can accomplish and have success at. And there may be a couple areas that you are not going to address. And for a lot of people, that's alcohol. I did talk in the book about alcohol. I think that cutting down from wherever people are is benefit. I actually tried sobriety as part of writing the book, and I've stuck with that because it works for my body and my brain. But that's an area where there may be people that just skip that chapter altogether, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other issue. I've tried sobriety myself, and it really adjusts your life quite significantly when you don't drink. Okay, I am very interested in hormone therapy. And we hear a lot in the menopause space, even though it's not recommended by guiding bodies, that this is connected to estrogen loss. The higher rates of dementia and Alzheimer's in women is connected to estrogen loss. There's research going on. Dr. Lisa Mosconi is researching it. And I see a lot of doctors saying that it prevents dementia. And I wonder just how you feel about the whole thing, about hormone therapy, about these claims.
When I was training, it was not controversial. It was accepted widely that estrogen, female hormone replacement, I should say both, because estrogen and then progesterone, if people need that too, depending on their uterine status. We accepted back then that it was preventative for heart disease, stroke, and dementia. So that was all my training. And then right when I finished training, the Women's Health Initiative study was released that turned all of that upside down and said, oh no, it puts us at risk of stroke. It puts us at higher risk of heart disease and dementia. And like the next day, the world went off of hormone replacement therapy. And then it's been 20 years of pulling apart that study. There were a lot of doctors who right away were skeptical and said they used the wrong estrogen. It's probably horse estrogen that predisposes us to all these problems. And it may not be the bioidentical human hormones that do that. And as you mentioned, piece by piece, every subcomponent of that study has been looked at. And we're starting to return to looking at female hormone replacement as beneficial for general female wellness, including brain health. But what's really challenging is it's not as hard for me to go back because we have to look at our underlying biases. And so my bias is towards being pro hormone therapy because that's where I trained. It's really hard to undo your foundational training in residency. So it was easy for me to see those studies and be open to those results. It's harder for physicians that came behind me that their training was all around women's health initiative. And now the literature coming out is completely contrary to their training. And so you definitely I find a lot of primary care physicians who are 100% would not even consider hormone replacement therapy in women. And so it's been really hard as a dementia specialist to encourage some of my primary care doctors to accept that some of my women need to have a trial of hormone replacement therapy as part of their memory management. So that's been challenging. And I love to see some of the doctors that are coming out and really giving hormone replacement therapy a voice, even if it's on Instagram, but empowering patients to learn for themselves what the risks are, what the benefits are, and giving them the information so they can approach their physician and discuss, if hormone replacement's right for them. So I do see a lot more women on hormone replacement, and I think they're seeing the benefit from that, body and brain. So I'm an advocate for that, but it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge in the community.
Isn't it a bit more nuanced though? Like you said, the kind of hormone therapy.
Yes,
Because aren't there connections with progestin versus progesterone, and aren't those confounding the studies a little bit? Because I do know the Lancet Commission on Dementia tackled hormone therapy this year, and they did not recommend it. Report, and I thought maybe they're doing what a lot of people do, which is just lump it all the studies together and say we can't recommend it.
Yes. And I think that the subtlety of what type of hormones we use really does matter. I think bioidentical hormones are what need to be studied. And so there are a lot of different formulations. And I agree, when you lump them all together, you flesh out that benefit. I also think that the confounding variables are not always well enough controlled for. And so sometimes those subtle changes in hormone therapy are not going to be visible when we're looking at populations that I don't think other risk factors are controlled well enough, like exercise. Sometimes their brackets for equivalent exercise are actually too wide. And so we're pulling in a lot of confounding variables there that seem to be controlled, but actually the variance of exercise is so wide that it actually is not controlling for that. Also diet. I think there are a lot of good things the Lancet Commission has done with dementia, and they have shown that even with some of the studies they've lumped that have a lot of variables, they've still shown that almost 50% of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias are related to lifestyle factors. So they're seeing that. But I think there are even some other interventions and studies they could look to in a cleaner sense, in a narrower range of research that would add more risk factor modification onto their recommendations. And I think we'd push that above 50%.
Do you recommend in your book that women go on hormone therapy?
Of course, in my book, I have to be so careful about what I can recommend because they're not my patients and I can't make medical recommendations. So I lay out I lay out some of the data that suggests that hormone replacement therapy may be beneficial to help people have that conversation with their physician, and then recommend sources if their physician is not open to that discussion. They may want to go get a second opinion from somebody who's perhaps through like North American Menopause Society. There are menopause societies that can link people to physicians who are open to having that conversation and can really discuss the benefits and risks.
Why do you think there are more cases of dementia and Alzheimer's in women? What's your take on that?
I think there are, I think part of it are the hormones. Our hormones are different. I think that even when we're correcting for estrogens, I don't think enough women are getting corrected in their testosterone level. And so that may be also impacting the studies on hormone replacement, because when we look on an absolute level, we have more testosterone than we have estrogen. So I think, and we lose our testosterone as we age, just like men do. So I think we have more hormonal change as we age. And I think even in the studies where we're correcting some of our hormones, we're not correcting all of them. So I think that's leaving a bit of a gap there. I also think that iron buildup is an issue that has not been studied enough, especially when we look at rates of heart disease as an example. We see that while women are menstruating, that we have lesser rates of cardiovascular disease. But once we pass menopause, we get on the exact same trajectory as men do. And so you have to go a couple levels deep to discuss to understand why I would be calling out iron. When we look at the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease, we often find heavy metals, we often find iron. There are a lot of there are a lot of women who are treated for anemia with iron, and it actually may be iron recycling problem and not an iron deficiency problem. Iron recycling would be more treatable by copper, actually, than by iron. And there's a potential for women to be building up excess iron even while they're menstruating, because there's no enzymatic reaction in the body that clears iron. The only way we clear iron is by bleeding. I think that there are some iron issues that are a little bit unique to women that lead to that. Many more women get treated with iron for anemia than men. And so I think that's actually a topic that needs to be much better studied, because I think we just have a knee-jerk reaction to treat women with iron if they look like they have iron deficiency without testing all those other mechanisms and seeing if they're just having a recycling issue.
That is super interesting. And I have biohackers, male biohackers saying that women after menopause should give blood every 3 months. And how do you feel about that for that reason?
Well, so I have a unique take on that because I'm O negative. So I'm a universal donor and that blood is just like gold. So I feel like I have to share that because it's used in trauma. When people come in, they don't even have to get matched. They can just pour O negative into them. So whenever I can, I donate. I was an every 8-week person, and then there'll be like a couple months where I go in and I don't have enough blood to donate. But I think it's a good idea. I think that blood donation, biohackers do it. I do it for 2 reasons. I think I do want to lose the iron. I don't want to have excess iron. My dad had a little bit of excess iron, not quite at the disease state we call hemochromatosis, but I think in my family, we tend to build up iron. So I donate because I think it's probably beneficial health-wise, and also I know that it's beneficial for the community. I know that there's a doctor out there who's a biohacker doctor. He actually gets blood taken every week or something. Like he does this whole like constant, I don't advocate that. If you want to help somebody else also by donating blood, that's a win. And if it also is helping to get rid of a little bit of your iron, that's an additional benefit.
Yeah. If the blood bank lets you come back, it's probably okay.
Right. Yes.
If you're like, what are you doing here again? Then maybe you should calm down. Okay. What about choline? How do you feel about choline and the deficiencies we're hearing about in choline and some of the drugs that we take that are anticholinergic? And
yes, so choline is important. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, the first class of medications we had to treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease had to do with choline and a derivative of choline called acetylcholine, because that's a compound in our brain that goes down when we have Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And those medications, they weren't actually just giving us acetylcholine, they were blocking the enzyme in our brain that breaks it down. Actually, I should just say the enzyme in our body that breaks it down, because it breaks it down in the stomach too. We do have those same receptors in our gut. So we were trying to effectively increase the amount of acetylcholine in our brain just by leaving it around longer, because it wasn't getting broken down as quickly. And so the thought is, if we supplement with choline, will that help us make more neurotransmitters, namely acetylcholine? And we may do that. That's beneficial. I think in terms of, if we're talking about a universal supplement, because once we get into supplements, there's all kinds of things we can talk about. In terms of the most universal supplements for brain health, I think my number one would be creatine. actually. Creatine has great data behind it in terms of brain health, in terms of general health, in terms of maintaining muscle bulk, which is really important as we age, especially in women. And really hard to find any downsides to it. So, of course, people have to talk to their physician first before they start any supplement. Physicians are hard pressed to find a reason to recommend against creatine. So, that's a pretty universal green light. So, I would say go in my top ones. And I would say creatine is by far the top in terms of one that's applicable to most people, tolerable by most people, fewest side effects. And then a supplement that I think is right behind that I think is super compelling is lion's mane mushroom. Great data on that one for people who have brain injury, traumatic brain injury, which I see a ton of patients who played football or they bike or, a lot of, I can't believe how many patients of mine have had concussion in the past. And so I like that one. It's very well tolerated, low side effect profile, and really good data on benefit. So in terms of ones that are tolerated, those are my top two, actually. Choline is pretty high up there, phosphatidylserine. There's all kinds of great brain supplements up there, but I think those are the two that most doctors are likely to be on board with, which would be creatine and lion's mane. Magnesium. Yes, there's so much magnesium deficiency. So people can supplement with magnesium. And if they do, then I would recommend they supplement with a magnesium supplement that has multiple forms of magnesium. Some tend to stimulate our gut, which can be a limiting factor.
Yeah.
The magnesium that's the most beneficial for the brain is magnesium threonate, and it tends not to stimulate the gut that much, and it's really beneficial for brain health. So that's the one I like. I really do like people to use natural salt that has all the compounds that go with it. I don't really recommend low sodium diet for brain health. That just doesn't make sense. But as I said before, when you cut out the processed foods, then you can salt the food you're making at home with those healthy salt. We really do need those salts. An area there's recently come into controversy is water intake. Was 8 glasses actually too much? That I think really is more of a conversation of a salt deficiency or the right kind of salt deficiency. And so it's almost like when we're talking about the Lancet and how they're looking at things, I think it's one of those things where we're looking at water and saying, oh, we're getting too much water. I think we're getting too little healthy salt. So people might be getting kind of junk salt, but I think we're getting too little good salt and all the healthy compounds. And then it looks like excess water. It's just messed up. Like we've over vilified salt. I get asked that question almost at every brain health talk I give. And not even all hypertensives need to cut down on salt. If they're eating all the processed garbage, yes, okay, they're getting too much salt. But most people who are hypertensive are not particularly salt sensitive. We've really over vilified it and made people afraid of salting with healthy salt. But then doctors aren't having the conversation about all the junk salt that they're taking in the processed foods. If your listeners are already on the health path and cooking most of their meals and avoiding processed food, we don't have to be so suspicious of salt, especially those healthy salts.
Like anything else, just because they're doctors doesn't mean they know the difference in salt.
Agreed. And I think we should look at our doctors and look at how healthy they seem or don't seem, and then temper their advice with literally a grain of salt. There's some cardiologists at my hospital that they look like a heart attack on a plate. Like, I can't believe they're cardiologists. And so I would just look at like the low fat diet they're recommending, the drugs they're recommending, and think, is there the advice I want to follow? Because I look at the functional medicine docs and their exercise. Functional medicine to me is just completely the place to go. If you can find somebody who takes your insurance or figure out a way that can be incorporated in your life, the root cause medicine is the way to go. And those doctors, you can just tell, like, their skin's glowing. They look strong compared to a lot of the doctors and their recommendations and the way they live. You just got to look at the messenger and the message and be sure they're consistent and they make sense.
It's a great point. If you made an appointment with the new hairdresser and you walked in and they had a terrible haircut, you hopefully walk right back out.
Point.
One job.
Yeah. And I think it's fair. We all have to make judgments constantly, but I think it's okay we've got to pull back from medicine as it used to be, where it was just very dogmatic and do as I say, and here's my advice. And it came from this agency and this body who makes these broad recommendations and they're right for everybody. And as a patient, advocate for yourself, for your body, way better than your physician does. You take the time to think about your body way more than they do. And if they're giving you a 15-minute appointment that's a one-sided conversation, it's time to find somebody new. That might even be online. There's a lot of great functional medicine services online. And I think we're just going into a great new area of medicine where patients can advocate for themselves and should advocate for themselves. And there's so much information on the internet. Any doctor who tells you they don't like Google searches, like it's time to move on, because we want you to come in with that information. If you come in with half of the information, it's a great conversation. And we can talk about why, okay, maybe I agree with that, or maybe I don't agree with that, but let's have a conversation, not just tell you you're wrong. There's great information out there. I find people are using ChatGPT to ask their health questions. They come in with such a great understanding that it's a really effective conversation in driving their health forward. So I love that.
Yeah. You have to be pretty centered and confident in yourself. And if, I don't know, maybe it's like an ego thing or something. It's destabilizing to have someone come in and question.
I'm not saying just go with whatever ChatGPT says, but like actually some of the things people brought to me, I'm impressed. It's really done a wide look at the research out there and summarized it in a way that's understandable. And it's a great foundation to have a conversation and decide how to go forward.
Okay. What about like loneliness and trauma and unhappy relationships and marriages that go on for decades and not living your heart's desire? And I'm lumping a whole bunch of emotional stuff in one group. But what about the pain of the human emotional condition and dementia? Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you see?
Yeah, it's linked. There are studies that show stress, depression, loneliness, they all are contributing factors to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. There's no question. There's also quite a body of literature relating stress, stressful circumstances, long-standing grief to cancer diagnoses. The mind-body connection is just amazingly strong. There's also, on the converse side of the emotional spectrum, there are studies that show that gratitude is positive for health. Positive attitude is positive for health. So I think that we really need to address mental health earlier and better to ease chronic disease later in life. It's connected to everything. It's connected to inflammation, which is at the root of all of these diseases. In terms of how to do that, there are so many different avenues, and I don't know that I would advocate for one over another, but it has to be addressed. It can't be ignored. All those diagnoses are linked to Alzheimer's disease and dementia.
What is correlated with an increased risk of dementia that people might not know about?
Oh, that's a great question. To me, I feel like it's getting a ton of press, but they might not realize hearing is such a big risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And so even if they have heard it, I'm here to nag. Because also I started wearing a hearing aid in my 40s. So I don't accept the excuse that it makes you look old because I don't care.
Okay. Yeah.
People don't see and they correct their vision with glasses. They're not like, oh, I'm not going to wear my glasses and stumble around. They wear glasses. And if we're having a hearing loss, it's a treatable risk factor for Alzheimer's disease that has a big impact. When we treat hearing loss, either with hearing aids or any other device, like an implanted device, we reverse that risk. So I advocate for people getting their hearing checked starting at 50, even if they don't think they have a hearing loss. There's plenty of places you can just pop in and have a free hearing test. The big box stores, some of them have that. I had a notable sudden onset of hearing loss, so that's why I got checked. But starting at 50 and then following your audiologist's recommendations for follow-up screening is really important. As soon as that pops up, you want to intervene. And most people, if they're not just doing regular screening, they're getting to the audiologist 5, 6, 7 years after their hearing loss actually starts. So we want to get rid of that gap by, usually audiologists will recommend screening every 1 to 2 years. So we want to chew into that untreated delay area by getting screened. And the hearing aids are so comfortable and small now. They Bluetooth to your phone. They're really great. And the other thing is, for people who wear glasses and may not be interested in having their hearing checked or wearing a hearing aid, it's like the sensation of when you put on your glasses and then you're looking around going, oh my goodness, I didn't see all the leaves on that tree. I can't believe how beautiful and crisp everything is. That's how it is when your hearing is corrected and you didn't realize you had a problem. That's my biggest point, that I think it's the easiest thing people can do, and it makes a big impact.
Is it just because you're struggling? Is that you're straining your brain to hear? Is that the reason?
You know what we think it is? We think it's because that part of your brain is not getting stimulated. And since it's not getting input, it atrophies. We think that's probably the mechanism.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
So, yeah. And vision too is if you're, wasn't that in the Lancet, the recent report, vision?
So really, I think the way to think about it globally is the less input and stimulation your brain is getting, the worse it is. So that kind of ties in why low education is a risk factor for dementia. It's not that going to school for a longer time itself is what's protecting the brain. It's that when you think hard and when you problem solve, it increases blood flow to your brain, and that brings in more oxygen. It takes out more toxins. So just think about that process with everything you do. The area of your brain that gets hearing, if it's not getting stimulated, it's not drawing in more blood, it's not demanding more energy to process. And so it's not getting that increased oxygen and increased outflow of toxins. Same with the visual cortex in the back of the brain if your vision's not good. Same with the emotional parts of your brain if you're not getting interaction. There are emotional parts of our brain that respond to love, warm feelings. And if we're not getting that part in our emotional centers, they're not getting the stimulation. So you can think of it in that universal way. Whatever part of your brain is not getting stimulated is suffering from that. Is that lack of exercise and the motor cortex? That's part of it. Part of exercise is because we actually release hormones into our bloodstream from our muscles that promote the survival and growth of neurons in our brain. But I think if your listeners just think of, we just want more healthy blood flow to the brain. And so we want it stimulated in many different ways.
I have not had it explained like that. That's amazing. Okay. So you have a brain action plan over on your website, brainhealthactionplan.com. That's it.
Exactly. And it's on Amazon. Yeah. Okay. You can find it anywhere.
Yeah. And you're MD Teryn, Teryn on X.
I know. It's so hard not to go on Twitter. I keep forgetting it's X.
Did you see my mouth going X? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go follow you over there. I just love the way you explain everything. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And this is going to help a lot of people.
Thank you for having me.
Hotflash Inc. was created and is hosted by Ann Marie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Ann Marie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hotflash Inc. Media.